Hello and welcome to another episode of the DVD Graveyard. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at The New York Ripper from 1982, directed by Lucio Fulci. And, this is one, out of all of Fulci's movies, I've been fairly, I've known about, especially things like Zombie 2, being a very popular film. I've known about that for, a long time, basically since I've started collecting. But The New York Ripper is definitely one that has come into my attention just within the past, probably 5 to 6 years now. It's still been a few years for me, but it's one that I had never even really heard about. I didn't know anything about it. I just kind of happened to stumble on it on Amazon one day. I was just kind of scrolling through, and I saw that, and I'm, again, being a big Fulci fan, I was like, what the hell is this? So I went and looked it up and kind of read sort of the brief plot synopsis on it, and it kind of sounded sort of silly, but it was at the same time just something that really sounded like it would be up my alley. And I did watch a trailer for it. There was a trailer on Amazon. And, the trailer just hooked me instantly, and I was like, I've got to see this damn movie. So I picked up a copy, which I've still got right here. I'll talk more about that actual release in just a second. But this is one that as soon as I watched it, I fell in love with this movie. It is absolutely one of my favorite Fulci films, and it's probably also one of his most controversial films. Just for some of the subject matter and the way that some of the murders are portrayed, because it's very brutal. Again, by today's standard, a lot of these movies are fairly tame, but this one, just a lot of the violence, especially being directed towards women in this movie. A lot of people say that this movie comes across as very misogynistic, almost, and I could see that. But at the same time, I think that it needs to be as violent as it is, and it needs to kind of come across this way in order to show a serial killer that specifically targets women. So I think it was done really well, and this has some really damn good effects in this movie. Some of my favorites, but most of the kills are again very kind of straightforward. This one is definitely it is a giallo film. A lot of people kind of lump this into the slasher genre, which I could see that as well. But to me, the two film, the two genres, giallo and the slasher film, they kind of, slashers kind of came out of the giallo movement. So, they're I don't really want to say they're one and the same, because they're not. Once you kind of know the differences, you can kind of pick it out. But you can really. This one, to me, is definitely a giallo film. I do not lump this into the slasher category. So, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and read the plot synopsis off the back of this Blue Underground DVD I have here. This is the one that I originally bought and that I originally saw the movie on, and I still have it. It's actually a great copy. It doesn't have very many extras on it. It has a small interview with Zora Kurova, which is one of the actresses in this film, and then of course it has some of the it has the theatrical trailer, and then it has some of the locations from then and now. So I think that's cool. You get a few extras, not much, but just kind of just enough to. But there's really not a lot of extras about this movie, period. But anyway, we'll a blade-wielding psychopath is on the loose, turning the Big Apple bright red with the blood of beautiful young women. As NYPD detectives follow the trail of butchery from the decks of the Staten Island Ferry to the sex shows of Times Square, each brutal murder becomes a sadistic taunt in the city that never sleeps. He's the killer that can't be stopped. So, that is one thing that I actually didn't know when, going into this movie, and even kind of doing the research on it. I was wondering if it was actually filmed in New York, and it sure as hell was, which is surprising. Now, you can't really find much as far as, what the budget was on this movie. But, if they're actually filming in New York, from what I understand, a lot of films like Jason Takes Manhattan is one that kind of comes to mind, where they doubled New York as Vancouver. They used Vancouver for most of those shots because it was just too expensive to film there, from what I understand. So, I don't know if they were doing this illegally or how they got away with it, because, again, this is a very low-budget film. Most of Fulci's movies were very low-budget endeavors. So, I don't know, again, if they were just shooting kind of under the table or what was going on there. But yes, this is filmed on location, and you get a lot of actually really interesting New York locations, which I thought was just great, and I thought that was awesome, that they actually went that kind of extra mile. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the cast a little bit. This movie has a pretty decent cast, so it mainly follows Jack Hedley, who plays Lieutenant Fred Williams, and he's this kind of detective, this cop who is sort of investigating all of the murders that kind of take place, around the city, and he kind of gets sucked into this a little bit more than he wants to. But he's great in this movie. I think he does a fine job. We also get Almonta Keller, I think is how you say her name, who plays Faye Majors, which she kind of comes into the plot a little bit later. Howard Ross, who plays Mika Scalinda, and then Andre, I'm sorry, I said Andrea. Andre Oshipinti, I think. His last name's kind of a mouthful, but he plays Peter. And again, they kind of become important later on. And then, of course, Alexandra Delicali, she's in this. She's kind of a Fulci regular. She's been in a few Fulci films. And then Daniela Doria is in this movie as well. Again, we talked about her in the last film. And then, of course, Paolo Malco, who we also talked about in the last film. He is also in this movie. He plays Dr. Paul Davis. So, pretty decent cast of kind of standard Fulci alumni, I guess you could say. So basically, this movie, what's going on is there is a killer in the city of New York, and he just brutalizes these women, in kind of the same fashion. I mean, it's a lot of stabbings, a lot of slashings, aside from, a couple of scenes, which we'll, get more into the gore. But, we get these really nice shots of the city. New York just looks great. It's seedy looking 80s New York. I've never been to New York, especially in the 1980s, so I couldn't really say if this is accurate, but it's kind of that way that you sort of picture New York around this time. It's very shady, very, very kind of what's the word for it? Sort of gritty and very kind of not somewhere that you really want to be. And there's just this killer going around. Of course, Lieutenant Fred Williams, he kind of starts to kind of investigate these murders. Like I said, he is a detective. And, we're just kind of piecing everything together and trying to kind of figure out, sort of what's going on, and we're introduced to various characters throughout the movie, which I also find really interesting because, again, there's not really one centralized character. I mean, I guess your your main character would be Lieutenant Williams is kind of your main guy, but, he's kind of this sort of burnout cop, again, who is investigating this, or detective, I should say, who's investigating these murders. And, he's not really, a great guy, per se. I mean, he's not really he's not a piece of shit or anything, but, he spends a lot of time with this hooker that he has, played by Daniela Doria. She's, like I said, in a ton of Fulci films. She just kind of usually plays the pretty girl who dies, who gets killed. And so he kind of, we're introduced to all these characters, and as they're investigating the murders, we kind of get a few of our red herrings kind of thrown in there. Again, one of those being Howard Ross playing Mika Scalinda. And one of the first things that happens is we meet another character, Mrs. Weisberg. She's this lady who kind of runs this apartment complex, and she is there with the first girl that got murdered on the Staten Island ferry, which, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about the murders sort of all at once, because that's kind of how I want to do it. I want to, go through kind of, not really all of them, but I want to kind of discuss those as a whole. But she kind of tells detectives something that's really interesting, and kind of what makes this movie stand out amongst other giallo films and even slasher films, is she says that she overheard a conversation on the phone with one of the girls that was murdered on the ferry, and said that the guy who called her, the killer, was talking like a duck. And of course, that's one thing that I read, going into this movie, because you hear that and you're like, he talks like a duck. Like, what the hell does that mean? Like, what do you mean? He talks like a duck. And even Lieutenant Williams is kind of the same way. He's like, what do you mean? And she's even, like, quack, 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 like that, And that's one thing that really kind of you'll either find really goofy about this movie and might turn you off to it, or, again, you'll find it really goofy in kind of a creepy way, and it'll kind of turn you on to this movie, because I'm kind of that, that second one there, is I find it actually kind of creepy. And basically what they mean by he talks like a duck is, he kind of talks like this when he's talking to you on the phone, and he goes, he'll call you on the phone, and then that's, and especially even when he's doing the murders, he gets really hyped, he's like, and it's fucking creepy. Like, I mean, just to think about somebody doing that as they're brutally stabbing someone, I think that's really creepy. So he kind of takes on that the killer sort of takes on this duck persona. The Ripper has this kind of persona, which again kind of comes into play later on as to why he does that. So that was one of the first things I read about this, and I was like, that's crazy. Like that's really different, and of course I love it now. I think it's just that was such a great idea, to kind of throw that in there. Again, it makes this killer, it sets him apart from just about any other slasher villain, any other giallo film that you have, anything like that. That really, again, you can say that to anyone who has seen this or has seen a lot of these movies. You can be like, yeah, it's the one where the guy talks like a duck, and they're like, oh, duh, New York Ripper. I know exactly what you're talking about. So I think that's a really interesting sort of phenomenon, I guess you could say, with this movie, is just that little kind of tidbit that they added in there for the killer. So once we actually get kind of acquainted with that, of course, Lieutenant Williams starts getting phone calls from the killer, who's kind of, again, sort of taunting him, and that kind of leads up to this big kind of final thing, more or less, which, again, I'll talk to it whenever I talk about it, whenever I talk about the murders. But the whole movie is just kind of this investigation, and of course we're following Mika Skalinda around this whole film, and he is kind of who we think is our killer, basically, because they kind of break down this thing that the killer has some sort of physical defect. He's probably missing some fingers on his hand. I don't know if they get that from the fact that Skalinda is already missing those fingers, if they already know that, because one person that we meet in this, I'll talk about that in a second, but they get to, they kind of break that down. So the whole time, in this movie, which is something goofy, they're like, don't talk to anybody who's missing 2 fingers off their right hand. So I think that's just a kind of a really funny sort of goofy thing, but it's kind of what they boil it down to, more or less. So the only thing that really kind of not really bugs me, but the only thing that they kind of do incorrectly in this movie, I don't even really want to say incorrectly, it's something that they should have done a little bit different in this movie, and it's the same thing that I said in Friday the 13th, the first Friday the 13th specifically, is, again, this is a giallo, and so giallo films are murder mysteries, so the whole movie we're trying to figure out who is doing this, who is the killer. Is it this guy? Is it this guy? Is it Skalinda? Is it, whoever? Who is it? The only problem with this movie, again, much like Friday the 13th, is they introduce these 2 characters way too late in the movie. So that when they show up, again, if they had showed up earlier, it'd be a little bit different. But they show up so late in the movie that as soon as they come on screen, you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure you're going to have something to do with this, especially some of the stuff that they show, like so Faye Majors, her character in this movie, I'm sorry, that is her character in this movie, played by Almonta Keller. She is basically attacked by the Ripper, and she's followed by Skalinda, and that's kind of who she ends up telling the police it is, because I guess she hallucinates, and she even hallucinates her boyfriend Peter, who she thinks is the killer, or is who she thinks tried to kill her, I should say, and she ends up getting stabbed and very brutally injured, and she ends up in the hospital. And of course, as soon as they kind of start putting all those pieces into place and kind of giving us all that information, we're like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. So again, that's kind of the only fault, not the only fault, because I mean this movie has a few faults, but that's kind of the main problem that I see with this. As much as I love this movie, as soon as that happened, as soon as we're introduced to that character and that whole situation happens, you know exactly what's going to happen. Again, much like, in Friday the 13th, when Mrs. Voorhees shows up, you're like, oh, you haven't been here the entire movie. Obviously, you're going to be, somebody important to the plot, because, why else would we be meeting you again this late in the movie? So once we meet them, of course, like I said, we kind of have this whole exchange between Faye and Peter, and Faye is kind of, because of this dream that she had, and things are starting to kind of not really add up, like with Peter going out at night, and of course, she just sort of has some flashbacks to the night that this happened, and it kind of starts to kind of put some pieces together for her. She really starts to kind of question, was it Skalinda that was actually doing this? And of course, it ends up being Peter. Sorry, spoiler alert there. But at this point, this movie is over 40 years old, so I apologize if you didn't know that. But again, it's pretty obvious once you get to a certain point in the movie. So anyway, she figures out that it is Peter, and of course, Skalinda is found dead. On this on the beach somewhere next to a river, I should say, and all the pieces kind of start to fit together for the police. Lieutenant Williams, they head straight over there because they're kind of keeping in touch with Faye, because she's the only one who has survived the Ripper's crimes, and they go in and they kill Peter. And we find out that Peter, basically what was going on is he has a daughter who was very sick, or she's very sick, and she is physically deformed. She's missing an arm, and she's in the hospital. And basically, his motivation in this movie was that his daughter, she was never really able to grow up to be a woman, I guess, really is what it boils down to. And the duck persona is basically his daughter, because him and his daughter apparently had this thing that they would go back and forth, and she would tell him, he would tell her this story about this duck, and he would always do the duck voice. And she has this little kind of duck toy next to her bed, which I believe is actually the same duck thing from Don't Torture a Duckling, which is one of Fulci's earlier films. Also a really good movie. I don't revisit it often, but I should. Maybe I'll talk about that one sooner or later. I don't know. We'll see. So anyway, that's basically what happens. We find out that was his kind of whole motivation, which I actually really like. That motive, that's actually somewhat believable, and it's not overly complicated, but it still makes sense, for this movie anyway. And so that's basically kind of what goes down. So before I wrap this up, I do want to talk about the kills, and like I said, I wanted to talk about the kills as their own kind of bit, because this has some of the most brutal and just violent and sadistic kills in really any Fulci movie, in my personal opinion. And maybe it's just because it is a human doing it, whereas in other films it's usually zombies or spirits or whatever you want to, however you want to look at that. This is definitely a very brutal slasher style murders, is what happens in this. Some of the standout ones, for example, is like when Alexandra Deli-Colli, whenever she is killed, she's kind of another central character in this movie. She's basically her and her husband in this film. They kind of have this open sort of swinger type relationship, and basically she kind of goes out and she ends up being killed by the Ripper, and she is just stabbed brutally and sliced up up the chest. Very brutal. That's a great kill. Of course, there's the first kill in the movie with the girl on the Staten Island ferry who is stabbed to death in the car. That is a really excellent kill as well. That's when we first kind of meet, not really meet the Ripper, but that's when we get the first, our first kind of on-screen kill. That's a great one as well. But, of course, and then there's another scene where, Alexandra Deli-Colli's character goes to this sort of like sex theater where she's watching people have sex, and one of the girls who was on stage, she ends up going to the back and is like stabbed up the coochie with a broken bottle. That one's pretty gnarly. Again, just very brutal kills. But the person who gets it the worst in this movie and it's probably the one of my favorite Fulci death scenes in any of his films, to be honest with you, because again, it is so brutal and so violent and unrelenting, is Daniela Doria, who plays Kitty. And like I said earlier, she is kind of this, she is a prostitute who basically Lieutenant Williams hires her all the time, and I guess that's his favorite prostitute. You know, and again, she does fine in this movie. I like seeing her in any of these Fulci movies. She's always a delight to see. She's just kind of the pretty girl, you know, who's just there to kind of get killed. But she, basically, the Ripper calls Lieutenant Williams at one point in this movie, and he's kind of taunting him, and he tells her that he has Kitty, you know, at a certain place, and of course they try to track the killer down, and the Ripper kind of pulls a fast one on him, and he has like a walkie-talkie up against this payphone, so when they track down the actual call where it's originating from, they go to the wrong location, and it's too late for Kitty because he has her tied up at her apartment. And this, again, is probably the most brutal kill, not only in this movie, but in any Fulci movie. But Kitty is just completely, tortured with basically, it's pretty much just a razor blade is what the Ripper uses. And it's this great scene, a lot of close-ups that just make you just, oh, God. Like, there's a scene where, the killer, is cutting through her breast. He's slicing her down through her stomach. And, it's all so slow and painful. And it's up close in your face. You see every little bit of it. And, again, that's kind of a sort of a Fulci staple, is that you really linger with the gore, which I really like that, because, again, it's one of those things where, you can't look away from it. No matter how brutal it is, you're not able to look away because the camera is just holding on this shot. She's just sliced up, up and down everywhere. The greatest part of this is where the killer actually, and of course it's a Fulci movie, so we get some eyeball stuff, but the killer takes the razor blade and slices directly through Kitty's eyeball. And that is just so, oh God. It's not as bad as the eyeball scene in Zombie 2. That's probably, that one still kind of makes me wince every time I see it. It kind of makes me cringe a little bit. But it's pretty rough, and it looks really good, for what it is, to be honest with you. But again, that whole scene, it's the best kill scene in the film. It's just so slow and dragged out, and it's awful, just what happens to her. But again, it's a crazy kill. So that is the New York Ripper from 1982. Again, it's another Fulci classic. If you are a Fulci fan, or if you're just a slasher fan and you want something just a little bit different, I highly recommend this movie. I think that any fan of a slasher film would enjoy this, period. I think that I would recommend this to any, hardcore slasher fan, because, it's fantastic. It's such a great movie, and it's so different. It is kind of goofy, but, it's got really good effects, some really brutal kills in this movie, really good music. That's one thing I forgot to mention earlier, is the music is kind of, like in any other film that I would see, that this theme probably would not work, but the music works so well for this movie and fits the atmosphere of the movie so well. I really like the way that they kind of portray New York City in this movie, because it's very dark and seedy, and again, it just plays into the whole tone and the brutality of this movie. It's great. Again, this is one of my favorite Fulci films, without a doubt. I would absolutely put this pretty high on a list if I were to rank them, which I might do at some point. We'll see. But for the time being, I'm going to move on from Fulci just for the moment, because I've got a few more that I do want to for sure cover. That Fulci did, because I'm a big Fulci fan. But this one is definitely one that I had to get out, because I was just talking about it yesterday with a friend of mine. And then, of course, I watched, the Gates of Hell trilogy, and usually once I kind of watch a few Fulci movies, it puts me in the mood to watch a few more. So, I felt like it was the right time to go ahead and cover this one. So I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope you enjoy this film if you get the chance to sit down and watch it. I don't really think it's streaming. Like, I think it was streaming on Tubi for a while. I think it's on Pluto TV, if I'm not mistaken. It should be free on there. I don't have Pluto myself, so I couldn't say. I've just had this DVD copy. But if you get the chance, I would recommend picking up this DVD copy because it's pretty cheap. I mean, I got it pretty reasonably priced. Again, probably about 6 years ago is whenever I bought it. But I mean, when I bought it then, it really wasn't too bad. So, I would recommend this DVD, or I know there's a Blu-ray, and I think there's a 4K of it now. So if you get the chance, definitely pick it up if you're a physical media guy like myself, or gal, whoever you are, whoever's listening to this, if anyone is listening to this. But anyway, stay tuned for the next episode. I hope you all enjoyed this review. As always, have a great night, and goodbye.